Hello everyone, my name is Fraser McCallum. Welcome to Phenomenological Research. So there's 5 dominant approaches to qualitative research. As Creswell points out, one of these, prolific in modern research, is phenomenology, or phenomenological research. And Van Manen described this field as the study of lived or existential meanings that have shown themselves to individuals. The goal is to describe a lived experience, or phenomena. So the key word is essence, as Coletzi tells us, and we're trying to tap into the essence of something that the participants have experienced. The description culminates in sort of a shared understanding of the phenomenon. Phenomena, Is that now stuck in your head for the next 4 days? I hope so. A phenomenon is something that exists that can be seen, felt, tasted, especially something very specific. So some examples include a man-made phenomenon, the residential school system in Canada. Gravity is a natural phenomenon. El Niño is a weather phenomenon. Riding the bus across Canada is a potentially romantic or inhumane phenomenon. Phenomena. Literally any specific experience known to man can be studied in this way. Here's the horrible weather events in Puerto Rico this past fall. We could look at fandom for teams in Canada that may or may not be worth your time, or a ferry ride to Prince Edward Island, where I'm from. As with all research methods, you must review consent forms with participants before they sign and ensure anonymity and confidentiality is protected. Now, bracketing is a process of setting aside one's beliefs, feelings, and perceptions to be more open or faithful to the phenomenon. And prior to data collection, researchers should detail any personal experience they may have had with the phenomenon in an effort to remove their biases. In this type of research, participants are often identified as co-researchers, as they will often get the chance to review the final analysis and attempt to assist in achieving consensus. Something else I should mention in terms of ethics is that this is all about the art of reliving an experience. And as a researcher, you're putting a person back into an event. You're taking the participant back into the experience. And that can draw up major emotions. So you have to plan these very cautiously. Now, researchers gather experience descriptions, and these can be accomplished in many different ways. You can use an interview, you could use a written or oral report, or even aesthetic expressions, art forms like music, visual art, drama, poetry. So Creswell, as quoted in Campbell, identifies a number of key elements. So again, we're attempting to outline, let's call it Z, of the phenomenon. And this is a shared experience. So we're trying to speak to a universal form and approximate some sort of general claim. Again, the participants hold the key to understanding this phenomenon. And we're really trying to attempt to locate the essence of the experience, asking empathetic questions. How did that make you feel? Did you have hope when X happened? What differences did you notice in yourself at this point in the experience? Again, not leading the participants, but evoking specific questions and really getting at the what was experienced and how was it experienced. We can think of Z as the phenomenon and all the participants sort of feeding our understanding. And our goal with phenomenology is to achieve a greater understanding than even one participant has, say participant 4. What our study should do is come away with the power of all of the participants' understandings combined together. So if we think of Z as a phenomenon such as a woman's experience transitioning into a shelter, all of these different participants are driving that understanding. And the higher number of observations we have, or interpretations, the higher gradient of accounts. So looking at some examples, This was the first one I looked at, Belonging at Work by Brown and McClure. And this studied the powerful feelings of belonging in job settings. Participants were recruited for their willingness and availability and diversity of job experience, and they were colleagues, family, friends, and acquaintances of the researchers. They asked 2 questions. What was belonging at work like? And do you remember a particular time when you experienced it? Approximately 130 hours of recorded interviews were transcribed. And they combed through the tone, the language, the text, and the drama of the storytelling to uncover the phenomena. There were 12 participants, and of course these aren't their real names. You can read a little bit of their profile. And basically they read the data, they collected the data, read the data, broke them into meaningful parts, organized those parts into sort of clusters of themes, expressed the data in a disciplinary way, and then summarized and synthesized that data for communication with other scholars. And some key findings that came out of that were really along the themes of connecting with colleagues and being included, being recognized at work, competition at work, finding a self-identity at work, being needed. Now, some critiques that I had of the study were that the participants were all friends and family and acquaintances of the researchers, which seems too close to the source, potentially. And again, they only tapped into 12 people. Now, that's not entirely troubling, but again, the higher number of interpretations, the higher we push it, the higher the gradient of accounts. And there's a saturation point that may or may not have been reached in this study. From a research perspective, it might also be interesting to explore the nature further of competition at work. And the researchers talk about how, they're curious it may be going forward. What are the costs to the business of employees feeling like they do or do not belong? My second study, this is for Rakib in the class, this was about sports fandom in Portugal, and it compared level of fanaticism and behavior, sort of tribal behavior, in surf lovers and soccer or football fans, and the impact of this tribalism on the consumption of associated brands. The concept model was applied through 4 focus group meetings with people of different levels of commitment. And of course, focus groups have been very popular in social sciences for several decades, and they obtained different types of information when they broke into the focus groups. Focus groups were largely male, ranging in age from 21 to 27 for the surfers and from 17 to 48 for the football fans. And the moderator used different techniques, including projected computer techniques. These were PowerPoint presentations, and the participants would view these images and respond to sort of scenarios about them. This allowed them to sort of visualize the described situations and questions. And they also used what's called a pad test, in which you ask participants on a continuum ranging from 1 to 10, to answer various questions, sort of privately at a computer. Now, I found this study kind of confusing, to be honest. It was an interesting subject matter, but I thought it was kind of muddled by blending 2 sports and then breaking into different levels of fanaticism, if you will, within each of those sports. I think you could perhaps have a clearer study if you compared maybe surfing in Australia and Hawaii and Portugal, or soccer in many different regions of the world. Some places like Brazil are discussed in the report, where there's certainly a football fever. So I found this study sort of got in its own way at times, but I appreciated the appendix and sort of some of these visualizations. The graphing was very good and made it easy to understand what they were talking about conceptually, but I found the framework a little overly complicated. For my final example, I'm going to look at a study from 2002 by Anderson and Spencer. And this is the one that I'm going to ask you to think about and do some reading on this week and answer some questions on. This was about cognitive representations of AIDS, and the author's purpose was to describe AIDS patients' representations of their illness. Basically, how people visualize their disease might be key to understanding the medication adherence and other health behaviors like quality of life. This is what Anderson and Spencer posited. Some of the representations that they found in their out of 175 significant statements were that AIDS could be viewed visually as death, as bodily destruction, as Christ's will, and as just a disease. Kalitzky's method was employed in analyzing participants' transcripts, so all written transcripts were read several times to obtain an overall feel for them. Again, 9 or 10 different themes were identified. And Spencer and Anderson had sampled 41 men and 17 women, and their inclusion criteria included having a diagnosis of AIDS, being 18 years of age or older, being able to communicate in English, and having passed a mini mental exam. Questions you can see that they asked on the screen in front of you. I looked at such things as, how would you describe HIV/AIDS? What feelings come to mind? What meaning does it have in your life? It became apparent that a greater depth could be achieved by asking participants to draw their image of AIDS and provide an explanation of their drawing. 8 participants did so, including a 53-year-old man who drew his image as a devil with multiple horns and bloodshot eyes and sharp, sharp teeth, describing the mouth as teeth with blood dripping down and sucking you dry. Another man drew AIDS as an angry purple animal with red teeth, stated that the color purple symbolized a bruise, and the red teeth destruction. A 36-year-old black woman pictured herself lying on a bed, surrounded by her husband and children, and she wrote, "Pain from head to toe, no hair, can't move, can't eat, lonely and scared, family loving you, and you can't love them back." Anderson and Spencer suggested that further research combining imaging and objective measures of medication adherence and risk behaviors is needed to determine if there's an association between illness representations and quality of life. I thought this study was very cohesive, very clear. The methodology was interesting. I hadn't read something that used aesthetic and art in such way. My only critique was that there were no limitations outlined for this study. So I'll challenge you in your reading of the study to think about that. So, my fellow classmates, I leave you with some discussion and discourse on your thoughts about the measurements in phenomenology and what intrigues you about this field. That basically concludes my introduction, very brief overview to phenomenology. And I'll ask you to consider if this is something you would employ in your PR or communications work. My name is Fraser McCallum. Thank you very much.